Okay, so on this stream, I've been talking a lot. I'm going to continue reading the book that I have been reading on this channel, and this book is called The Atlantean Conspiracy. Now this book is a little controversial. It is about how, there are secret societies in politics and the entertainment business, and there's a lot of people, that you don't even think about that really do move the world in a certain way. And I'm not saying that I agree with every single thing in this book, but I think it makes a lot of good points. It talks about certain bloodlines and how, just in the last stream I learned that George W. Bush's grandfather actually had a lot of business dealings with funding the Nazis in their building of weaponry during World War II. Good luck, Jamal says, nice. I like books, but I am not a bookworm. Yeah, the thing is, I think a lot of us do like to hear the information in books, but it's hard to just sit down and read, So that's what I do like to do. On my channel, I do like to read books, give commentary. I'm really open to any opinions or comments or questions in the comments. I engage every few paragraphs. So I'm going to keep reading here. Feel free to do so, okay? And also, guys, if you've missed part of this book or, you missed streams in the future, I do simultaneously record these and put them on YouTube. My title on YouTube is Kumquat Kelly, same as it is here. So feel free to subscribe and watch there. All right, so I'm going to jump in here. This is a quote from Ralph Epperson. It says, "So the American people who had suffered through the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the battles between Andrew Jackson and the Second Bank of the United States, the Civil War, the previous panics of 1873 and 1893, and now the Panic of 1907, were finally conditioned to the point of accepting the solution offered by those who had caused all of these events, the international bankers. That solution was a central bank." End quote. This is another quote from Jim Marrs. It says, "These men concluded not to have one central bank in the United States, but several, and they agreed that no one was to utter the words central or bank. Most important, they decided that this creation would be made to look like an official agency of the U.S. government." End quote. Oh, great job, Jamal. Thanks, guys. Okay. They call it the Federal Reserve, but it is neither federal nor a reserve. It is about as federal as Federal Express, and as much a reserve as American Indian reservations. It is a network of banks, 5 originally, now 12, headed at the New York branch, all of them privately owned, but made to appear like an official government agency. The original stockholders of the Federal Reserve were Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Warburgs, Russells, Morgans, Peabodys, and Reynolds, and Illuminati families. All Illuminati families. This is a quote from Fritz Springmeier. "The Federal Reserve Bank of New York was controlled by 5 banks, which owned 53% of its stock. These 5 banks were controlled by Nathan M. Rothschild and Sons of London. Control over the U.S. Fed is basically control over the world's money. That fact alone shows how immense the Rothschild power is. If one examines who has been appointed to head the Fed and to run it, the connections of the Federal Reserve System to the Rothschilds can further be seen. Another private enterprise using the name Federal that the Rothschilds also direct is Federal Express. Anyone else might be taken to court for making their businesses sound like they are government, not the Rothschilds. It is appropriate for them to appropriate the name of Federal because by way of MI6 via the CIA, they instruct the U.S. government. Senators are bought and paid off by their system, as investigators of the BCCI are discovering." End quote. Oh, thanks, guys. In 1913, in an effort to pacify dissenters, the conspirators pre-planned a fake opposition to their central bank scheme. House Banking and Currency Committee Chairman Carter Glass wrote what was promoted as an alternative solution, the Federal Reserve Act. This is a quote by Jim Marrs. "Jekyll Island planners," and this was in the last stream, this Jekyll Island meeting was between a lot of I think it was like 7 bankers, like very rich bankers from across the globe, coming together to come up with plans on how to control monetary systems in various countries. Okay, so Jekyll Island planners Vanderlip and Aldrich spoke out venomously against Glass's bill, even though entire sections were identical to the Aldrich plan. It was clearly an effort to garner public support for the Glass bill by the appearance of banker opposition. The appearance of opposition by Wall Street was necessary. William McAdoo, Wilson's son-in-law, who was appointed Secretary of the Treasury, later revealed, bankers fought the Federal Reserve Act with the tireless energy of men fighting a forest fire. They said it was a populistic, socialistic, half-baked, destructive, infantile, badly conceived, and unworkable. However, McAdoo said in interviews with these bankers, I perceived gradually through all the haze and smoke of controversy that the banking world was not really as much opposed to the bill as it pretended to be. Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act on December 23, 1913, just 2 days before Christmas, with some congressmen already home for the holidays, and with the average citizen's attention clearly elsewhere. End quote. Oh, hi guys. If you're just joining the stream right now, I'm reading from the book, The Atlantean Conspiracy. In 1913, Congressman Lindbergh warned that the Federal Reserve System, quote, establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legitimized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. End quote. Okay, I want to just make sure that you're clear on what that just was. Basically what they're saying is because the Federal Reserve controls the monetary supply, the Federal Reserve also controls how much money is being put into circulation. They can take out money, they can, they control that, So when you say, oh, well, it's impossible for them to make a, inflation or deflation, no, they are literally the ones who are controlling whether or not we are in a recession or not. And the banks in turn will act accordingly. If the Federal Reserve is creating less money, they will let people have less loans, And there's this roller coaster. And when people, lose their money, then banks can, take their property. It's a whole scheme. It's really quite effective. After the bankers finished profiting from the World War, and mind you, this was talked about before because both countries will borrow money from banks. Like banks fund wars on both sides. Oh, thanks, Raphael. And so it doesn't matter who wins the war, the banks will always profit. Doesn't matter, because there's always interest on those loans that the governments have to pay back, regardless of who wins. All right, after the bankers finished profiting from the World War, they decided to cause an economic depression in the U.S. so that they could further buy up the market, further expand the government, and further control the American people. Creating booms, busts, and recessions and depressions is completely scientific when you decide the amount of money printed and circulated. As Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman said, quote, the Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933, end quote. And this is a quote now from Gary Allen from the Rockefeller File. To think that the crash of 1929 was an accident or the result of stupidity defies all logic. The international bankers who promoted the inflationary policies pushed the propaganda which pumped up the stock market represented too many generations of accumulated expertise to have blundered into the Great Depression. So, I don't know if you guys are familiar with what they're talking about here, but there was this campaign for people to invest in the stock market, their own money, or they could take loans out. People could take loans out from the bank to invest in the stock market. If you're familiar with the show Babylon Berlin on Netflix, in the most recent season, I believe it was season 3, it talks about the Great Depression in Germany and the people who were basically orchestrating this whole spiel for basically the stock market to crash and then the banks to just collect all of the interest on those loans, because people, default and they keep whatever, they still have to pay them back, or they have to declare bankruptcy. All right, so it was the game of boom and bust, using economic crisis to consolidate political power at the top, where it can be most easily controlled. The major cause of the economic collapse was the deliberately created credit inflation by the Federal Reserve. In 6 years, it had inflated the money supply by 62%, inducing market speculations and unwise investments by middle Americans who were being set up for a shearing. When the shearing came, the sheep took a realistic look at their economy and panicked. Optimism was replaced by economic despair. Despair produced a willingness to accept a major expansion of government controls over the economy. End quote. Oh, hi, Mia Nova. Guys, if you're just joining the stream right now, I'm reading from the book, The Atlantean Conspiracy. During the Depression, Congressman Louis T. McFadden was a very outspoken voice against the Federal Reserve. Regarding the Great Depression, he said, quote, "It was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all." End quote. In 1932, he said, quote, "We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. The Federal Reserve Board has cheated the people of the United States out of enough money to pay the national debt 3 times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the United States, has bankrupted itself, and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the defects of the law under which it operates, through the maladministration of the law by the Federal Reserve Board, and through the corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it." End quote. Preceding McFadden's activism, he received a series of death threats and then died of food poisoning shortly after under suspicious circumstances. This is a quote from U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. "The real truth of the matter is that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government since the days of Andrew Jackson." Okay, so this is a quote from Ralph Epperson. He says, "Once inflation or deflation has been documented, the government economists point with pride at the supposed perpetrators, the public. They never direct their attention at the real culprit in America, the privately owned Federal Reserve System. This private banking establishment has complete control over the quantity of money in circulation. Therefore, they have the ability to create inflation or deflation whenever they choose to do so." End quote. Since the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve bankers have continued to manipulate the market for their own gain, and done so through periodic planned market plunges, after which they buy up all they can. In 1936 to 37, stock prices plummeted 50%. In 1948, dropped 16%. In 1953, down 13%. 1956 to 57, down 13%. And late in 57, down another 19%. It has continued like this every few years until today. In 1963, President Kennedy passed Executive Order 11110, which stripped the Federal Reserve from its power to loan money to the U.S. government. It also called for the printing of $450 billion in U.S.-backed debt-free currency, and gave the Treasury Department the authority to issue silver certificates against the Treasury silver holdings. 6 months after this, JFK was killed. As soon as his successor, Lyndon Johnson, took office, the first thing he did was suspend the printing of JFK silver certificates and took them out of circulation. Oh, I'm really good. Guys, I'm just going to refill my water bottle real quick. I'll be right back. All right, we're back. This is a quote from Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. "It's money out of thin air. It's the secrecy of it that's so bad. The ownership is by members of all the banks. It is something Congress created. The first central/national bank was created by Alexander Hamilton, and Jefferson got rid of it. The second one was gotten rid of by Andrew Jackson. And I'm just looking forward to being the president that gets rid of the third national bank." End quote. Okay, and this is a quote, a very long quote, by Jordan Maxwell. Do you remember the television show called Mission Impossible? If you ever see a rerun, watch the opening of the show very closely. What will come up on the screen will be the insignia IMF, supposedly standing for the Impossible Mission Force. The Impossible Mission Force, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, what were they always doing on that show? They were always tricking leaders out of positions of authority, assassinating somebody, helping people escape, or doing some other dirty deal, all in a war for power. Whose power? Of course, they were always working for some government, but the agents are not supposed to know who that is for sure. They just do their jobs, not knowing who's really hired them. The IMF just sends them out on a mission that they must perform at all costs. And if anyone should find out who's really pulling the strings, then the agents are told that we're going to disavow any connection to you. Well, that is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is the power behind the Federal Reserve System, which is raping our country and destroying our economy. And these guys are doing it right in front of you, telling you what they are doing, but we just don't see it. Even after they spell it out for us on television, they are making comedies about it, like Get Smart. On one side you have chaos, and the other side you have control. And when you watch the show closely and ignore the foolishness, it is easy to see that the same operation is running both sides, creating chaos, then rushing in to control it, in order to accomplish an agenda. That is how it has always been done. Get smart. They are telling you something. End quote. Oh, thanks, guys. Okay, next subheading, the Round Table. The Round Table is a secret society that was started around the turn of the 20th century by Freemason and Rothschild agent Lord Alfred Milner, who was entrusted the mission by Cecil Rhodes. When statesman/businessman Cecil Rhodes died in 1902, he was one of the wealthiest men in the world. In his will, Rhodes devoted his entire fortune to the creation of the Round Table groups, the purpose of which would ultimately be to form a world government, or as he said in the will, quote, "To and for the establishment, promotion and development of a secret society, the true aim and object whereof shall be for the extension of British rule throughout the world." End quote. Cecil Rhodes' strong desire for world government was epitomized in his statement, quote, "I would annex the planets if I could," end quote. This is a quote from Dr. Carroll Quigley. In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had a personal income of at least £1 million sterling a year, which he would spend so freely for mysterious purposes that he was usually overdrawn on his account. Cecil Rhodes' commitment to a conspiracy to establish world government was set down in a series of wills described by Frank Idiot in his book American Road Scholarships, end quote. Frank Idiot in his book American Road Scholarships wrote, quote, "In 1888, Rhodes made his third will, leaving everything to Lord Rothschild, his financier and mining expertise, with an accompanying letter enclosing the written matter discussed between us. The model for this proposed secret society was the Society of Jesus, though he mentions also the Masons. The secret society was organized on the conspiratorial pattern of circles within circles. Professor Quigley informs us that the central part of the secret society was established by March 1891, using Rhodes' money. The organization was run for Rothschild by Lord Alfred Milner. The Round Table worked behind the scenes at the highest levels of British government, influencing foreign policy and England's involvement and conduct in World War II." Ashley says, "Can you read Three Little Pigs, please?" You know what? I'll put that up. I'll put that next on my list, Ashley. All right, Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar and a student of Round Table researcher Professor Quigley at Georgetown University. In his presidential acceptance speech, he thanked Dr. Quigley and called him his mentor. Carroll Quigley was not only a longtime researcher of the Round Table, but was brought inside for a couple years as official historian. He wrote about this in his book, 1966, Tragedy and Hope. Okay, this is a quote. This is a quote from Dr. Carroll Quigley. "The Rhodes Scholarships, which Clinton received, are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes, in 5 previous wills, left his fortune to form a secret society, which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. And what does not seem to be known to anyone is that this secret society continues to exist to this day. There does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates, to some extent, in the way the radical right believes the Communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the Communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected, both in the past and recently, to a few of its policies. But in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known." End quote. Oh, thanks, kid. Okay, this is a quote from David Icke. It says, "One of the most important secret societies within the Illuminati web is called the Round Table. It is based in Britain with branches across the world, and it is the Round Table that orchestrates the network of the Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, and the Royal Institute of International Affairs." End quote. Just like the ancient mystery schools, the Templars, Masons, Illuminati, and other secret societies, the Round Table groups were/are conducted in a pyramid structure with the most knowledge kept at the peak, and each person down the line working on a need-to-know basis, or as Rhodes discussed in his will, a succession of inner and outer circles. This is a quote from Jim Marrs. "The Round Table started out as a collection of semi-secret groups formed along the lines of the Illuminati and Freemasonry, with inner and outer circles and a pyramid hierarchy. The inner circle was called the Circle of Initiates, or the Elect, while the outer circle was called the Association of Helpers. 2 members of Rhodes' inner circle, Circle of Initiates, were British financiers, Lord Victor Rothschild and Lord Milner." End quote. This is a quote from David Icke. "These organizations, like the Round Table, are made up of inner and outer circles. The inner circle knows the agenda and works full-time to achieve it. The next circle knows much of the agenda and works to that end in their particular sphere of influence. The next circle is pretty much in the dark about the real agenda, but is manipulated to make the right decisions in their area of operation without knowing the true reason for them." End quote. All right, this is the next, oh, hello guys. Guys, if you're just joining the stream now, I'm reading from the book, The Atlantean Conspiracy. So this is a subtitle. It's called The CFR and the RIIA. The first 2 groups created by the Round Table Secret Society were the British Royal Institute for International Affairs, or the RIIA, in 1920, and the American Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR, in 1921. In fact, the original plans for both were drawn up during the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. Though they were given different names to mask their autonomy, the RIIA and CFR are just sub-branches of the Rhodes-Milner Round Table. Okay, so this is a quote from Dr. Carol Quigley. "At the end of the War of 1914, World War I, it became clear that the organization of this system, the Round Table, had to be greatly extended. This front organization, called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, had at its nucleus in each area the existing submerged Round Table group. In New York, it was known as the Council on Foreign Relations and was a front for J.P. Morgan and Company." End quote. This is a quote by Gary Allen. "Later, the plan was changed to create an ostensible autonomy because it seemed unwise to set up a single institute with branches. It had to be made to appear that the CFR in America and the RIIA in Britain were really independent bodies, lest the American public became aware the CFR was in fact a subsidiary of the Round Table group and react in patriotic fury. This is the group which designed the United Nations, the first major successful step on the road to a world superstate. At least 47 CFR members were among the American delegates to the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. Today, the CFR remains active in working toward its final goal of a government overall the world, a government which the insiders and their allies will control. The goal of the CFR is simply to abolish the United States with its constitutional guarantees of liberty, and they don't even try to hide it. Study number 7, published by the CFR on November 25, 1959, openly advocates building a new international order, which must be responsive to world aspirations for peace and for social and economic change. An international order, code word for world government, including states labeling themselves as socialist or communist, end quote. The CFR is a private group, not affiliated with the U.S. government, but made to look that way. Just as the Federal Reserve, the name Council on Foreign Relations, sounds official to the unsuspecting ear. And they even print a magazine called Foreign Affairs to help pacify the organization in the public mind. But the truth is, the CFR is not a council belonging to the U.S. government, and is in fact a secret society masquerading as an official organization. If they called it Republicrats for World Government or Demopublican Global Governance Group, then the herd might notice. Even if they called it the American Royal Institute for International Affairs, the sheeple might raise an eyebrow. This is the same reason our American leaders are called presidents and not prime ministers, even though they are all royalty. Admiral Chester Ward was a U.S. Judge Advocate General of the Navy and CFR member for 16 years. He said the purpose of the CFR was, quote, promoting disarmament and the submergence of U.S. sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government. In his book, Kissinger on the Couch, Ward wrote, the lust to surrender the sovereignty and independence of the United States is pervasive throughout most of the membership, and particularly in the leadership of several divergent cliques that make up what is actually a polycentric organization. Amanda says, what is your Instagram? My Instagram is at Kumquat Kelly. It's spelled exactly the same as my profile name. It's just without the space. This is a quote from Congressman John Rarick. The Council on Foreign Relations is the establishment. Not only does it have influence and power in key decision-making positions at the highest levels of government to apply pressure from above, but it also announces and uses individuals and groups to bring pressure from below, to justify the high-level decisions for converting the U.S. from a sovereign constitutional republic into a servile member state of a one-world dictatorship, end quote. CFR membership is made up of past, present, and future presidents, secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, ambassadors, senators, congressmen, judges, Federal Reserve System presidents, and chairmen, bankers, military leaders, media owners / personalities, lobbyist lawyers, corporate executives, think tank executives, and university presidents. CFR membership, oh dang, I went too far. Hold on guys, I lost my space. Here we go. CFR membership is composed of the most influential Americans of the century. Just look at the household names belonging to the CFR. George Bush, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, Condoleezza Rice, Al Gore, Jesse Jackson, James Woolsey, Fred Thompson, John McCain, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, Michael Bloomberg. I'm skipping through a few. There's a lot of them. Okay, yeah. Here's just a sampling of the CFR's corporate members. ABC News, American Express, Bank of America, Boeing, Chevron, Coca-Cola, ExxonMobil,